In this episode, Major Jake King of the Marietta Police Department and Dr. Pete Blair nerd out about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, collecting data, and how positive an impact BJJ can have on law enforcement. I hope you enjoy this one. All right, welcome to the show. Our podcast is called The Call, and we named it The Call in order to honor all of the first responders out there that this is how they receive their call to duty and their call to service. Most of us are called to serve in some way or other, and that's kind of why we're all here together. We are filming today. This is November 1st at the ALERRT conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And our program is the ALERRT program. We are a grant-funded, data-driven program that is housed out of Texas State University. And I am Eddie Molina, and I am the Southeast Regional Manager for the program. This is my partner, Casey.
Casey Williams, I'm the e-learning program manager for ALERRT.
Excellent, and we'll do some intros for our guests today, Jake King and Pete Blair. Jake, if you want to hit a quick intro to us, just a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, man, I'm from Marietta, Georgia. Work for the city of Marietta Police Department. Have my whole career, almost 24 years now. I'm a major with them. Please don't hold that against me. And I'm also a purple belt in JiuJitsu.
Awesome. We're not sure a major what, but Jake, we're here. We're very glad you're here with us. Jake is just a big contributor to the ALERRT program with the data that he's drawn up in his jiu-jitsu program, but also an adjunct for us and been around for a little while. So thanks for all you do, Jake.
Absolutely,
and
love it.
Pete, I'm gonna let you do your introduction, quick intro. And Pete Blair, for those of y'all who don't know, is kind of our commander. And if after your intro, if you don't mind covering a little bit about how I covered that this is a data-driven program, maybe throw in that at the end of your intro.
Sure, I'm Pete Blair. I'm the Executive Director of the ALERRT program. Been with the program since around 2009. Originally started on the research side of things, and then when the previous director retired, Don Montague, I put in for it and was made the Executive Director. My role has always been data for the program, and so what I try to do is collect real-life information that plugs back into what we do for training so that we're doing training that is really evidence-based. And we are oftentimes hesitant to even use the term evidence-based because it's been so diluted, so many different places and people use it, that sometimes evidence just means, well, it's evidence because I think it works. And when we say evidence, we're talking about real, empirical, observable things. So oftentimes we'll say that we're research-based as opposed to being evidence-based.
Yeah, and so I've been around the program for a long time. I've been an adjunct for a long time, and now I'm I hope I'm a permanent, right? Full-timer. I don't know if I'm a permanent. I guess I'll find out after this episode. But for one of the longtime cops, street cops, we always fought data. So I'm going to ask you the first nerd question. You said data and I said data. Does it ever irk you when people say data instead of data?
It doesn't bother me at all, but if you want to give Hunter a hard time,
that's the way to do
that'll get
it.
him.
Good.
That's good to know.
Yeah, that is good to know.
He also insists that data is always plural.
Oh.
It's not singular, so
Wow.
That doesn't bother me though.
Dr. Martindale, I'm going to remember this. So as one of the old school cops and trained under the old school mentality, we always fought the data. We always said, yeah, those guys don't know anything because those guys have never been on the street. And I remember that I remember you from the research side of the house, and when you took over, I remember everybody saying, it's like, he has no idea what's going on because he hasn't been out on the streets with us. But the more time I spent with you personally and just actually reading the research and all the papers that y'all put out, all the data we collect, I just think it's one of those things that's a no-brainer where we have to pay attention to the data because that's actual proof, right? So we've collected data on so many different things, and we have data all over our website, and we have data available to anybody that wants to call us or just log on to the website and check it all out. But one of the reasons that we're here today, and we're at the conference talking, and we'll talk a little bit to what your presentation is about, Jake. But as a matter of fact, let's just dive into that. What's your presentation about? Why are you here at the conference?
Well, the name of my presentation is NonViolent Police Intervention, but it really is bringing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to law enforcement. And it all started from an event multiple years ago where it was just embarrassing for what happened at this IHOP incident. After being in jiu-jitsu for a few months, I saw this incident take place and where 4 police officers couldn't control one person. And I thought, man, one jiu-jitsu person could definitely control that guy. So it started there. And it also comes from, I believe in law enforcement that, or at least in society, they've pretty much said, we don't like seeing our law enforcement officers punch and kick people. We're not saying you can't do it. We just don't like seeing it. It's an old school term. It's like it may be lawful, but it looks awful type thing. And that's where this program started from back then.
Wow. All right, so the jiu-jitsu itself, so, all right, I'm going to throw this out there because I'm known as one of the jokesters with my words. And on the front end of this podcast, I used to introduce myself as the Southeast Regional Commander, and God, for whatever reason, I can't get that out of my head, so I do that everywhere I go. And so when I started saying BJJ, I would always call it British Jiu-Jitsu to the Jiu-Jitsu hardcore people, and they would get so pissed off, and now I can't stop saying British Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
But we're talking about, when we say BJJ, we're talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the art form itself and all of that stuff, maybe y'all can cover, one of y'all wants to jump in and kind of cover the background of BJJ and how it came to the States.
Wow. Well, I'll start, and you'll be able to correct me and pick up. It's actually started in Japan. It's Japanese jiu-jitsu, and the jiu-jitsu translates loosely to the gentle art. And do you remember the guy's name that started it? If you do, then I'm just going to be quiet.
Well, it started jiu-jitsu? No, because it was a family thing that was done by a lot of people, and then it was systemized into a competitive sport, judo. That's Jigoro Kano started judo. And what happened, and it's kind of like has happened in some of the striking martial arts where I have a 5-finger death punch, but I can't show it to you because you'll die. And that was kind of the house jiu-jitsu people would do is, well, I have these deadly things that I can do. I'm totally awesome, but I can't show it to you because you'll die. And Kano said, well, that doesn't make sense to me. You actually have to be able to compete against each other and show that what you do works. And so that's how he systemized judo to be this competitive sport that allowed you to practice those techniques against somebody who's actively resisting you. And that's really how you kind of proof what works. And then one of his students went to Brazil, and that's met the original Gracie founders and taught them. And then they kind of judo focuses on the stand-up and the throwing part. The Brazilians started focusing on the groundwork part of it, tying people up and then working on the ground. And then the Gracies, the Machados, and all the others that came after that from there. And then their families started to move in the United States, and people ran into them in Brazil, that sort of thing. And it moved all over the world, really.
Yeah, but the original principle behind Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was defense. And the Gracie families put worldwide challenges and went and fought worldwide, too. Think of Vale Tudo, where they would fight, pretty much not to the death, but to, hey, you're finished, and it's no holds bar. Really, the only rules they had in some of the fights were you couldn't gouge the eyes and you couldn't go for the groin area. But other than that, everything else was open game. So they really proved it as a self-defense. And it actually, at one point, it was on the beaches of Brazil, and they were just walking out challenging anybody.
Yeah, and so for the people watching or listening, when he says Vale Tudo, it's a Brazilian term. It means anything goes, right? And that's basically the style of fighting that they did. And that competition, there were no rules. Just whoever walked out was the winner. And that was a great proving ground. So you'll notice the theme throughout the episode. You'll notice the theme that when we start talking about these things, it's always one of those comparison deals, right? And how Pete talked about the originating judo, it was all great until there was nobody to compete against. So once there was somebody to compete against, now you're starting to collect data, like how good am I, right? And so if we start talking about the formation of data-driven events or data-driven forms, this is a perfect example of it. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, now we're all studying it because it became really popular. The Gracies brought it. They did worldwide challenges, and they became popular when the UFC became a big thing, and it just grew from there. And there's gyms all over the place. Now there's gyms everywhere, and everybody's trying to learn it. Everybody's trying to be like those guys, and it's really a lot of fun. Great workout. I enjoy doing it myself. We do it at work. It's a great way to learn a little bit more about yourself and your physical capabilities. So what was the impetus for really pushing, because Jake, you guys, or maybe before we get there, maybe you can talk about the program that y'all are actually using now in Marietta, because you were key in pushing that program and creating that program. Can you talk a little bit about the program?
Yeah, the program currently in Marietta is that we have a mandatory program. And even before I ever became involved in this, there's a couple great programs out there that were pushing things like make it mandatory, make Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mandatory. I didn't understand it at the time. I'd never participated in any martial arts in my life until Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So our program is from the day of hire. We hire you on a Monday. You meet with me on Monday and I explain everything to you. I give you a sheet of paper and I issue you a gi. Tuesday at noon, you're in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class learning. We require 5 months, twice a week, mandatory. If you don't show up to Jiu-Jitsu, it's like you didn't show up to work. You were disciplined for it. But we compensate you. We pay you to go. We pay you while you're there. You're covered under workman's comp. We issue you the gear. And we encourage you to go more than twice a week, but the mandatory minimum is twice a week for 5 months. Now, so people ask, well, why? Where did the 5 months come from? And for us, it's from the data hire. When you go through the police academy and you're going to the road, that's right about a 5-month time frame for us. So once you go to the road, it becomes voluntary. You can still continue to train. Some guys and girls train up to 4 or 5 times a week, but the mandatory part drops off.
Okay, great. So once they hit the department, they're hitting jiu-jitsu, they're hitting the mats. That's awesome.
Day 2.
So now you talked about briefly about what started it, right? You started with the actual incident itself. And so obviously everything's driven by an incident. So you guys got started on it and you've collected all kinds of data from the very beginning of when you all started the program. I know you've posted those results somewhere along the ways, but can you talk a little bit about the results that you guys saw that was a reflection of that program?
Yeah, so initially I started looking at data. I'm not a data person. So I started looking at it because I was like, well, I don't see our officers getting injured that are jiu-jitsu officers as much as they used to. And this is 18 months into it. For workers' comp, right? And for my own city and my own self-preservation of the program, I wanted to prove to my boss that this program saves us money. Because when you're handing them a bill every month to pay for our jiu-jitsu program, there may come a time where they're like, we don't want to pay for this anymore. So I started looking at workers' comp injuries. During the 18 months after we started jiu-jitsu, we reduced injuries to officers by 48%. Now that saved us, just by averaging out 20 workers' comp claims, that saved us almost $67,000 in workers' comp claims in the 18-month period. So I could take that to my boss and say, look, I'm saving us a bunch of money. He's like, wow, you are saving us a bunch of money. And then I was like, well, what else is in there? Are they using tasers as much? Or what about suspects? That came up. There was all kinds of stuff that came into there. But one of the biggest things I wanted to prove is that it was saving us money at the time. But interesting, we're now 3 years, almost 3 years into this program, and to this day, we haven't had a jiu-jitsu officer injured in a fight. To this day, 3 years into it. The other part of that too, we haven't had a jiu-jitsu officer sued yet for use of force either.
Well, that's interesting.
Now, during that same time frame, we've had officers injured. Yeah, knock on wood. Yeah, we'd knock on something. We've had officers injured in fights, and we've had officers sued for use of force. Yes. But not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu officer.
That's cool. So you guys, so let's talk a little bit about jiu-jitsu as well. I was at a seminar with Travis Davison, who is one of the vice presidents of the SBG gym, and he described the different levels of jiu-jitsu. And he says as a white belt, which is, for those of y'all listening, everybody that starts out in jiu-jitsu, you start out as a white belt. He said your job as a white belt is to learn to survive. And your job, the next level up would be a blue belt. He said your next level up, the blue belt, your job is to learn how to escape. And as a purple belt, your job is to learn how to finish. And then brown belt and black belt are just about refining those skills. And when he broke it down as to survive, escape, and to finish, it's like it made total sense. Can you guys speak a little bit more to that, or see maybe you differ in opinion, or maybe speak about the climb through the ranks? Because y'all are both purple belts, right? So maybe y'all can speak about the climb through the ranks.
So jiu-jitsu is a little bit strange in the martial arts world. If you've done more traditional martial arts, and even I did a stand-up style of Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I've also done karate and things like that, and they have very codified advancement processes, right? You got to learn certain techniques, and then you put them together in certain ways for kata or self-defense scenarios or whatever it might be that you have set, but it's very it's very prescribed and linear, and jiu-jitsu tends to be much more open. And so not everybody who's at the same rank is going to know the same techniques in most places. Some exceptions, Gracie University tends to be more standardized about you have to know these specific techniques in order to do that, to advance to a certain rank. But in other jiu-jitsu schools, it's much more about your ability to perform. And whether it's you're focused on escaping, whether it's you're focused on surviving or finishing, or you're just trying to pick up a new aspect to how you play the sport aspect of it, there's a lot of variation there. And the interesting thing I think in jiu-jitsu is that no one has found the end of jiu-jitsu yet. There are still new techniques being found, still new ways to do things. And so it's not like some of these other martial arts where it's, yeah, we know exactly the entire encyclopedia of this martial art, I guess.
Right.
It's still being written in jiu-jitsu. And, you know, being an academic type person in the way that I like to think, there are some people that you can find out there on the web that are doing things that for traditional jiu-jitsu people, they would say, you are 100% wrong, you can't do this. And yet these guys are doing this and it's working. And they have a different theory behind how it's working. Now you got to give those people a chance to catch up when people say, okay, I see what you're doing now, and I can shut that down, and I can do whatever. That's all part of the sport. But it's still growing, it's still changing, still adapting, and that makes it exciting that way. And it's also much more of a physical expression of who you are, because my game doesn't look like Jake's game, and your game doesn't look like my game. Yeah. And so who you are, your size, your strength, how you like to play, the type of techniques you like change what you do in the sport. So there's much more variation. It's much harder to say, well, how long is it going to take you to make brown belt, for example? And the answer is, I don't know.
Right.
You know, and yeah, and just it'll happen when it happens, and you just keep plugging away and plugging away, and then the people who are up there are like, okay, you're there where you need to be now. And so in that aspect, it's very different. I will say that when you look at other martial arts, a purple belt in jiu-jitsu is probably the equivalent of a black belt in most of the other martial arts styles, as far as time and grade and proficiency. And then you also, because rolling or sparring is such a key part of jiu-jitsu, everybody in jiu-jitsu has a game, right? They can perform to some level. Whereas I've met karate black belts, for example, that I don't think that person could defend themselves ever.
Yeah.
But they can do the katas, they can do the forms, and so they advance and that sort of thing. That doesn't happen in jiu-jitsu, and it's also that way in judo, where in judo, typically the only way to gain advancement is to actually win at tournaments. So you got to go beat a certain number of people of your rank or higher, and then that's when you get promoted. So a judo guy is going to know how to throw you. I mean, that's it. And a jiu-jitsu guy is going to know how to grapple on the ground.
It's pretty interesting. So, like you say, the search is never over. The game doesn't end. It keeps on going. So I know that we have black belts in our group. In the gym that I follow, we have black belts. And it's funny to talk to. I talked to Travis Davison, who, my coach, who's a brown belt, loves this guy, feeds off of this guy. But Travis Davison feeds off of John Frankel like, I know nothing compared to John Frankel. And John Frankel says, I know nothing compared to Henry Aiken. It's like there's always another somebody like that. Do you guys find the same consistency? Y'all both wrestle in different gyms. Y'all both roll in different gyms. Does that seem to be the same consistency in your all's areas?
Yeah, no doubt. You know, in going back to what you asked originally, if you're going to stay in jiu-jitsu for a while, you have to enjoy the process. Because jiu-jitsu is a process. If you're looking for quick results or quick gains, or you're going to earn stripes and belts, that it just isn't going to happen. You have to really, really enjoy that grind through your belts and through your stripes. And you know, I don't know about you, Pete, but I think the first stripe I ever got on my white belt, I think I started crying, but you couldn't tell from all the sweat, you know, pouring down my face. I was like, I've never worked so hard for a piece of athletic tape in my entire life. Yeah. You know, and all the blood, literally blood, tears, and a lot of sweat through there. But yes, and like Pete was saying earlier, it's just what's so fascinating, and I always use the term fascinating about it, is because it never ends. There's always a move and there's always a counter. And it's constantly being learned. And the same thing from my coach who came from Jacare. You know, he's constantly learning to this day and then feeding off each other now. And then you get other black belts together. Like we formed this coalition in Georgia to design a program for jiu-jitsu in Georgia. And it was 5 top-tier black belts that have multiple world championships underneath them. And watching those 5 on the mat demonstrate moves to each other and then say, no, 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 there's a better way, do it this way. And you're looking at a 2-time world champion that's like, oh, I didn't think about that. No, 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 let's do it, let's try it this way. Let's keep it, it would be more simple if we do it this way. And that's 5 top-tier black belts getting together, and all of them 2nd, 3rd, 4th degree black belts, and then they were still teaching each other. And they're so receptive to it as well. It's like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh yeah, I'm taking that. I'm going to use that from now on. It's just amazing to see. So yeah, from what I experienced, yes.
And because of the sparring and the competition, you can imagine in your head whatever technique you want, but unless you're able to execute that against somebody on the mat, it doesn't matter, right? And so you might think, oh, this would be brilliant. I can do this. Then you go out and you can't do it, right? And so it doesn't work. And that's the brilliance of the technique, is it's constant feedback on what's happening and whether something is effective or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that when I started with an actual coach doing this, I was trying to explain to Jake, I think I started down the path with guys from my team that were going to a gym. And they came back and they taught us things, and we were doing things, and we had the opportunity to try those things out in real life, all the time. And that was cool. But man, once I started learning about the differences that it makes where you rest your weight and how you learn to use your weight, I remember I was mount bottom, and I had a 165-pound guy on top of me, which in any other way I could just throw him off of me. And when he put enough weight on me, it was hard for me to breathe. I was like, holy smokes, this really works. Like, this was changing my life up. What are some of the key points that you all learned going into the sport, going into the art? What was the first thing that you all learned about balance and weight distribution and that type of stuff where you felt, man, this really makes a difference?
Well, I think the very first thing you learn is to pick your feet up so you don't get the mat burn and your feet bleeding all over the mats. You learn that really quick. I know that is a little bit of weight distribution because your toes should always be live. So that I would say that's like the first thing you learn after your first roll session. You're like, I just took the top layer of skin off my feet, and I need to be a little bit better about that. But for me, that's part of the weight distribution.
Yeah, I grew up wrestling, and so if you play with wrestlers, you'll see that their weight control is really good all the time. I mean, that's part of the sport. And so it's natural for me, and I heard you talking in your talk earlier today about sharing your weight with the ground. And so you don't want to share your weight with the ground. You want to share your weight with your partner so that they're carrying your weight the whole time, and you want to make it miserable for them because they're carrying your weight the whole time. So it's their body weight plus your body weight every time they're trying to move anything they're trying to do. And so that's one of the first big things people need to learn, is that I'm always putting my weight on you. If I'm on top, I'm always putting my weight on you, and I'm always trying to crush you in some way so that you're having to deal with that. I don't ever want you to be comfortable. I want you to be struggling while you're down there.
Yeah, those are all big lessons to learn. So competition-wise, I know you all have both done competitions. What are the more memorable experiences from competitions you all have had?
So I actually have not competed, so I cannot speak on this.
Okay.
I know, yeah, it's a little fun fact.
So I competed when I was a kid, and then since I've come back to doing jiu-jitsu in the last few years, I did one competition. I'm an old man now, so I go in the old man division, and the last time, the one that I did, there was only one other guy in the competition, and what was really clear to me is that because I hadn't competed in so long, I wasn't as sharp as I used to be, and I was way too passive and way too hesitant to go hit stuff. And so basically I just waited out, and then he tried to catch me in a triangle, and I just slipped out of the triangle and passed his guard, got my 3 points, and then stuck him for the last 20 seconds of the match and said, okay, I'm going to win. Because I thought I was going to have another match, and I didn't want to be tired. So, you definitely, what I'll say the pluses for competition is, and you get it in your gym too, when somebody new comes that you've never rolled with before, there's always that anticipation like, oh man, I don't know what kind of game this person's going to have. I don't know what they're going to do. And so anybody who's done sports has that pre-game jitters, you might say, that are there, and you feel those butterflies, and you have that anxiety, I guess is what you would call it. And then you get out there on the mat and it goes away because you're too busy trying to do what you're trying to do. So I think competition is really beneficial from that point of view. I think when you're first starting, it's like that in class every day because you don't have a game yet and you don't know what the other person's going to do to you, except for after you've been there a couple days, you know you're going to be losing
Yeah.
you know, most of the time. And so you get used to dealing with that, what's there. And then, like you were saying, at the white belt, learning to survive, once you learn, like, okay, I can keep this person from just crushing me, that's a real accomplishment, right? That, you know, I've got these people who've been playing this game for a long time. They're all different body sizes, all different strengths and capabilities. And the ability to not get crushed by that person is a huge confidence builder. And then to not only not get crushed, but when you start looking at, can I get away? Okay, now I can get away. And then that's another big confidence builder, so.
And so feeding off of that, just, you know, you're feeding perfectly into where I want to go with this, Doc, but what he's saying, Jake, is like you learn to be comfortable with just surviving for now, and then learn to escape. Before we ever get to that purple belt level, before we learn to finish people or put them in those holes or possibly put them in the cuffs, how does that mentality translate into being on the streets, being in uniform, or having to put your hands on somebody out on the streets, learning to survive, learning to escape, learning to finish? How do you relate that all?
Oh, there's no doubt. Like the white belt level really prepares you for the street. And I've heard people say this before, and you probably have too, Pete, where they're like, they get to be a purple belt or higher, and they're like, well, I don't like rolling with the white belts. They're too spastic, or they act all crazy. And I have the opposite mentality. I was like, when I roll with a brand new white belt, it's the best thing ever because they really prepare me better for street fights. Like you're talking about being sharp and snappy with it, because you learn so much because they don't necessarily know what they're doing. Because after a while, you get really comfortable with the people that you're training with. And I mainly go to daytime classes. So I'll tell you, when I venture into the nighttime classes, like once a month, they generally try to take my head off in the most nice professional way possible, but they really, really try to take me down. And it sharpens me a lot to be, like you said, snappier and just more just pointed in what you're trying to do. That's what gets you ready for the street. And even myself on the street in the couple skirmishes that I've had since going through jiu-jitsu, but especially our new officers, they learn so well in that beginning point as a white belt. And since they're not going against other jiu-jitsu officers, I heard somebody say this, I take this term from them all the time, it's like a buffet of things that you can do because they're gonna extend their arms towards you. They're gonna try to roll away from you and do things that another jiu-jitsu officer's like, I'm not doing that because I know what's coming. And they find it to be so easy to control people out on the road.
And I think that's a direct translation that goes into, and we were all doing it, Casey can attest to this, but that first time you're out on the in your car by yourself and somebody jumps out of the car on a foot chase and everything goes from smooth Wolfman Jack language that they usually use on the radio to there's nothing intelligible while they're running and chasing somebody. And there's a lot of beeping words as well. But it's like, I think that whole mentality of learning to survive and learning to actually deal with that stress under pressure makes it a little bit easier to deal with how do you communicate with people while you're under that stress. And man, if you're having to roll with somebody and you can actually say stuff out loud, it's easier to translate that communication over to the person you're trying to control. And for the majority of our incidents, if you can actually control them with words, it makes it a little bit easier because if we're using the same type of communication with them that any other aggressor would use from the streets, then they're just going to keep rising that level up. And it's easier for us to go back to that word that we're all talking about now is to de-escalate. We're more able to de-escalate a situation when we're able to control ourselves first. And I think that's just one of the best things about jiu-jitsu. So the program itself, y'all created the program and pushed out to the department. I know that there's other programs out there. What are some of the better programs in different departments? And I know that we had talked previously about different states adopting programs. What were some of those things that we had talked about? Maybe Florida and Georgia looking at doing these things.
So with Florida starting the first, or Georgia starting the first certification, Florida FDLE has already reached out and said they want to be state number 2 because it is great to get to jiu-jitsu training, but it's also easier, it's more productive when you're talking to your command staffs to say, well, we're going to work towards a certification as well. Like, it's not just training. We're going to get Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu officer level 1, 2, 3, and 4, which eventually can get you to a blue belt in the state of Georgia. So Florida now wants to be number 2. What I found very interesting, my coach and I testified at the Georgia State Senate a couple times trying to get the program put into state law or a version of it. It didn't happen this session. It may happen this fall session. We're still working towards it. But Michigan actually presented a state law, and I testified in front of the Michigan State Senate, which was very eye-opening for me. And their law was actually to be a blue belt in jiu-jitsu or a brown belt in judo is what they were wanting every officer to do. And what I told them though, I was like, you can't mandate every officer to do this. Like that's going to tank the program right from the beginning. There's a lot of people that just are not going to participate in it, and you're going to get a lot of pushback. But starting it from the very beginning, yeah, you can, because they're new officers. You can pretty much make them do whatever you want, and they don't know the difference anyway, and you're paying them to go. So it's better to start there to get that culture shift. And we've seen that at Marietta. It's a culture shift now. I mean, all the way to the point where we have a Brazilian, the BJJ Officer of the Year. That's an award now that the coaches vote on. So you have Top Gun, you have Officer of the Year stuff. We have Jiu-Jitsu Officer of the Year. We've now developed ribbons for our uniforms. If you're blue belt, you can wear a ribbon on your uniform, or purple belt, you wear a purple belt ribbon. So to make that a part of the culture. So a lot of other agencies are following that, and I don't mean a lot. I don't even have a number. I get emails not every month, about every week, about they were successful in starting the program. Like Coral Springs, Florida, they started theirs last November, so they're just about to they're hitting a year right now. Here you guys, Fort Worth, they fired up their program and is doing really, really well with it. And then just in Cobb County, there's 8 agencies in Cobb County, and 6 now do jiu-jitsu programs.
So what about the bad side of it? What are some of the bad things that we're hearing, or are we hearing any bad stuff on it? I know Pete, you have direct ties with a lot of the guys that we employ, all of our adjuncts out there, and you hear a lot of the stories. And Jake, you have people calling you all the time. For those of y'all who haven't seen it, Jake came out with Henry Gracie and did a big push on this because the Gracies wanted to be involved in that as well. Let me tell you, we'll do everything we can from the program side. We'll do everything we can to help support the research and the data collection on these things. But that's a big thing for us, is we want to know more about it. What are the bad things that y'all are hearing back from the departments and programs that are out there for LE and Jiu-Jitsu?
I can't say I've heard anything back bad from departments. I've heard what I would call speculative theorizing on the part of civil rights advocates and some community groups and things like that, saying, well, if you're training them to fight, they're going to want to test that out on the street, right? So they're actually going to be more violent and more aggressive on the street because you're training them to fight. And so that's a testable hypothesis, right? And you can see right now in the data that we have from Marietta, you don't see that. If you were seeing that, you'd expect to see a spike in the number of encounters that are happening. You're not seeing a spike, you're seeing a drop, right? You're not seeing more injuries, for example. So that's not the case. And it also, for people who've been in martial arts, and for me having the ability to be around the people at ALERRT, because like you said, I'm not a street cop. I was never military or special forces or anything like that. But I get to work around a lot of people who I would consider to be real badass guys, right? And serious guys that if they wanted to take you out, they could take you out. They also tend to be the most laid back, nicest guys that I know because they're not worried about it. They have that confidence that Jake was talking about. They don't have to put on the show for you that they have something, because they know if it push came to shove, they would unscrew your head and that would be it, right? So I think that carries over on the street cops with jiu-jitsu, and we definitely have some older data from the FBI looking at violent encounters and that clearly shows that suspects or people who are going to resist or attack police officers do size the officers up and say, do I think I can take this officer? And there's one of the case studies from that report that came out a while ago. They had a guy who assaulted and killed an officer, and when they were interviewing him, or actually just assaulted, maybe didn't kill him, but he assaulted this officer. When they were interviewing him about why'd you assault this officer, trying to figure that out, he said, oh, I actually went there earlier in the day to the location that he assaulted the officer, because it was a store that the officers went to all the time. I went there earlier in the day, and there was this sergeant there, and he was all switched on and wired tight, and I didn't think I could take him. So I came back later and I saw this officer that I didn't think was there. And so if they have that confidence that they have the skill set to handle themselves, they know what to do, I think that gets transmitted and then that reduces that. So that's kind of my counter argument to the people on the civilian side who might say, well, it's going to encourage them to be more violent. It's quite the opposite. And same thing if you're raising kids. When I was growing up as a kid, I was always a rough and tumble kid, and so my parents always made me do non-contact kind of activities, like gymnastics and that. And when I got to junior high, I started wrestling. And then I stopped being that kind of rambunctious, roughhousing kid because I was taking care of it in wrestling, and you start to learn really fast. There's always somebody better than you, right?
Yeah, that's great. And you used the word that I love to talk about the most. You talked about the confidence. I think across the board, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, confidence is the dope of choice for everybody. And when I say dope of choice, it's like people turn to drugs. People have a different effect that they're looking for, a different impact that those drugs bring them. But confidence across the board, when you see that confident person walking out, especially that new confident person in uniform, that's the first line of force. That's the first use of force right there. Just showing up, your mere presence, whether you're confident or unconfident, that makes a big difference. And people see that about you. Can you guys maybe talk about, or especially you, Jake, the kids on your department, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I call them kids because they're all the new guys coming out. Is there a different level of confidence with them when they're handling the regular everyday calls? That confidence level because they've been on the mats for so long, or how they look when they're approaching people?
Yeah, and that was a side product that just wasn't expected at the time. So in the very beginning, we used to do exit surveys with them, blind. I would put it in their mailbox, or I would email it to them and say, you type in your answers, and then just put it back in my mailbox. No name, I don't want to see you. I want true feedback. And the number one word that came out of there was confidence for them, that they had real confidence. And we've seen this in many law enforcement videos where people have confidence in the badge on their chest, they have confidence in their taser, they have confidence in their gun. But when those things fail or people don't respect them, they lose their own confidence. So not only were our officers are new or young, I call them kids just like you, because compared to me, they are. I've been policing longer than a lot of them have been alive, which was a sad milestone to pass not too long ago. That they had confidence, but then it really came down to the FTOs. Our field training officers came back. When we had that original group of 7, the training officers came back to us and said, these kids are different. They're different than any other recruits we've ever had because they have confidence. And when it came time to put hands on somebody, they weren't afraid. And I tell them this too, like in that first day, I have this whole spiel that I tell them on their first day they're hired with us. I said, look, years ago before I started jiu-jitsu, if I was in a fight and you ended up on top of me, you were sitting on top of me, I would think that I have lost this fight. That would be my mindset. Yeah. Today, my mindset is, oh, we just started. I've been here 1,000 times, more than that now. I am ready to go. This is going to be fun. And that's their mindset because, like, I've been here before. I've had a 200-pound person sitting on top of me, or I've tried to take another bigger person because, as you know, with rolling, everybody rolls with each other. Male, female, old, young, small, big, that doesn't matter. Everybody rolls with each other. And so you really learn how to handle, and that's where their confidence comes from.
Yeah. Pete, what about some more data? Is there other data out there that we can think about or talk about that is impacting these types of programs across the country, or the way the programs and departments are being formed? Because there's a lot of people trying for something new.
Yeah, so we don't have, Jake's got his data from there, but with the data he has, it's kind of after the fact data, right? And they are already doing the program, they do it with a limited slice, and they have it. So it looks promising, right? It looks like there's something there, but we don't have the true experimental design, random controlled trial kind of data that you would have for, say, a medical trial to go out there. And that's something that we should be working towards. So anybody who's listening to this podcast, if your program's getting ready to start, please give me a holler before that so that I can talk to you a little bit about how to set this up so that we can get better data out of what's going on, right? So that's a big part of it. But we do know from a lot of work that we've done in other areas about training and how you train people that the typical police training model is the least effective training model that there is. Okay. Yeah. So it's called batch training, and it means if we are doing training in something, we put it all together back to back, and that's our training. So for example, it might be we're going to do DT. And so we're doing 3 days in a row of DT training, and that's your training because now you've got your required hours in DT training. But we know from looking at how that plays out that you'll get a lot better during those 3 days, but you don't retain it. It decays very quickly. What does work better is if I have, say, 24 hours of training that I'm going to give you, if I can spread that out over a longer time period, might be 24 weeks, okay, might be 12 weeks, 2 hours a week, something like that, that you will not get as far as quickly because you're losing something, because we train a little bit, I take a break for a couple days, I come back, maybe I forgot a little bit, I got to remember it. But we know that from how memory and learning works, that when we do that, we actually make those pathways stronger over time. And they will be resilient and they will be retained much longer than if I did all the training together. So you may not get your officers as far as you did in that 3-day cycle, but where you got them to will be maintained much longer and be much longer lasting. And that's why a 5-week program or a 5-month program like they're doing at Marietta a couple days a week is better than saying, oh, we're just going to take 40 hours and do a 40-hour training that we do here, and then you're done and you're a jiu-jitsu officer now. You'll look good at the end of that 40 hours, but you won't be as good as long as you would be if we had spread that out. And think about that from how we do sports training. You never did sports training where you showed up and, oh, it's a weekend seminar for our football team, and then now we're going to go play football. You know, like that's not the way you do it. So you got to do it over time. You got to have that. The other big key that you get in jiu-jitsu is feedback. And you get it not only from your coaches and instructors when they're teaching you techniques about, okay, do this and try that, do this, but you get immediate feedback when you start rolling about where you're at. Either you know how to do this or you don't know how to do this. And so that feedback then gets plugged back in, and if you've got a good coach, your coach is telling you, okay, I want you working on this kind of thing because it's a weak spot in what you're doing. So I'm going to focus on this kind of thing, and coach is going to watch and going to tell you, okay, you need to do this, looks good, doesn't look good, here's another way to try it, think about it this way, whatever it might be. Yeah. And then you start to identify those weak parts of what you're doing and bring those up. And then by bringing your worst parts to average, you actually get much better. And so we know from training that that's a much better way to train than the way we typically see in law enforcement training right now, which is that here's your big batch training, you had it, you walk away, and then that's it.
Yeah, and it's all one of those, I guess we talk about the numbers. The numbers is always a big thing for a big push for across every industry. And I know in police work it really is. It's about the numbers. How many arrests do you have per hours that you're spending out on the street? And it's not the contacts. It's not how much you're talking to people, how much you're impacting somebody's life, but how many people you're actually putting in jail or how many tickets you're writing. And those are the things that people are collecting data on. I know that we've had conversations before about the different ways that we could go about starting off a data collection on new departments that are going to a BJJ program. I know there's a lot of y'all are going to listen to this later on, and like Pete said, if y'all are fixing to start a program or y'all thinking about starting a program, y'all are going to reach out to Jake, say, how did y'all start your program? Include us in that if you can, because we really want to help the push across the country, because one of the things that we've been able to prove in our program is that creating a national standard is a big thing to help create the money flow, and the money flow is one of those things that makes it hard for a lot of the smaller departments to actually get people trained, get the officers out on the streets into the gym and actually have somebody quality teaching them how to do these things. So we'd love to be able to collect data on y'all. But yeah, just contact us as much as you possibly can. Jake, the data that y'all have collected, the information you put together, where can they find that at?
There's a couple places. If people reach out to me directly, which is pretty easy to find me at Marietta Police, you can call or just email the main line. And it always ends up with me. We have a big data packet that we send. We also turned all of our data over to Invictus LEO, which is a great supporter of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in law enforcement. They don't fly anybody's flag individually. They're just a supporter of the cause. And I mentioned earlier about making it mandatory. That actually, I believe it came from them originally, but they're a big supporter of that. So Invictus LEO on the website, you can go there and there's a PDF that you can download, and it gives you all of our information. And they actually put some extra stuff together from an interview I did with them to support the program. So it's pretty easy to find it there, and we give it away. I have two proposals that have already been written, and I email them out in Word documents, so you can just change the headers. We have 2 CALEA-approved policies already that are in there too, that agencies have gotten approved. So we try to give everything we possibly can so that they can go forward and present it to their command staffs to get it started. But to hit on that, you're talking about money. One thing I did want to make sure we had an opportunity to talk about is that we used asset forfeiture in the very beginning to pay for it, because it's post-certified training, it's approved training, and in my paperwork I explain how to do that. But then we made it a budget item. You know, we have so much success, it's here to stay with Marietta forever, so we made it a budget item. But to this day, the city hasn't paid any money for it, because we've always found de-escalation grants to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the epitome of de-escalation. And you see that in our videos, you see that in the officers, and de-escalation at its core is like, okay, I could have used this, but I was able to reduce it down to this, or, you know. But a lot of people will think de-escalation comes from words, you know, what I say to people. Well, that's just not true with a lot of people. It doesn't matter what you say. You may not have an opportunity to say anything, or they may be in a state of mind where they're just not hearing you anyway. And so to this day, we haven't spent any of our own money on it. We've always found grants to pay for it. So I really, really encourage people to continue to drive that avenue.
Yeah, that's a great tip for everybody out there. I know I talk a lot about at one point there was a vendor who was running around all the tactical conferences, and they were able to get armored cars out to as many of the teams as possible, because they helped those teams write the grants, and they showed them the template. They showed them how to get the money for that vehicle. And that was a great vehicle for them, for a great vehicle of money moving for people. And so thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to push in the direction of closing it out, because I think we've covered a lot of the main stuff. But Pete, I want to give you the chance. Is there anything else you want to close out with that you think we need to include on this?
Yeah, I was going to circle back when you're talking at the beginning, and when you talk about a partnership between practitioners and academics. And you're right when you say, well, you know, Pete's never been on the street, he doesn't know this stuff, and you're right. But it's not my expertise that's actually shaping what we're doing. So my expertise is I know how to collect the data, I know how to analyze the data, but you have to come up with the questions that are important and what you think makes for a fair test of what you're looking at. And so my expertise is I know how to take that and make it science, you know, so to speak. So that's where the partnership works out, is that I don't come in and tell you, I already know what it should be. I already know what you should be doing. I already know what it is. And so if you look at our room entry research, none of the room entry research that we have was an idea that I was like, oh, we should do this. It was all stuff that ALERRT people knew and had arguments about and said, hey, if you do this, if you do that, and to me, that's an empirical question. Okay, let's set up a scenario and let's say we run it this way, we run it this way. We randomly assign people the conditions, we collect that data, we assess that data, and we can see, is there a difference? And that's the expertise that the academic can bring into the fold to help get stronger data and stronger confidence in what you're doing, and then also be able to argue more forcefully about, well, hey, it's not just me saying I'm a cop and we did this and it worked. It's now we've tried to validate this, we've got multiple data sets, and we've looked at it a couple different ways, and we're doing these comparisons and statistical analyses, and so we can say, okay, this is what the real true result looks like. And so that's important to keep in mind, is that the academic doesn't have to be an expert in the topic area. Their expertise is in how to design research and how to produce good data that gives you confidence in the results.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the things that I've learned a lot from hanging out with you. And data's what speaks when you're presenting new ideas to anybody. You present something new to an administrator, the data is what speaks. The data is what's going to generate the funds, generate the time to be able to get approvals.
And defend yourself in court.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, that's perfect. Jake, how about you? Anything you want to close out with or touch on before we go?
Yeah, first I'd be remiss, I know this wasn't one of the questions, but I'll ask it. It's like, hey, Jake, have you and Pete ever rolled? And the answer is yes, actually, we have. He submitted me once.
All right.
In the 5-minute. I have to give credit where credit was due, and he had good pressure. He was on me, man. He was down on top of me, and he got me once. He did.
And now he's going to pay me back next time we roll.
I am.
I would expect nothing less.
Yeah, with all the best spirit you possibly can. But on a more serious note, I say this all the time when I'm giving presentations. It's like, this is our profession, and it's been decimated the past couple of years. we earned some of those black eyes, but there's some that we didn't earn. They were given to us anyway. And all we're really trying to do is save the profession, because the public expects us to operate at a certain level and to be able to do certain things. But if we're not giving the officers the tools and the training and the education that they need to accomplish that, well, what's going to change? You know, you hear stuff talking about defunding the police. That's not what they need. They need more, and it's not even a very expensive program, but to help them so that they are performing at the level that you want them to be. At the end of the day, that's what they want, and that's what this program has helped bring forward. Is it the end all? No, it's not. I think if you combine Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with some mental health education and how to talk to people and deal with people that are in crisis. I asked this question one time. We have this thing called CIT, Crisis Intervention Training, which is good training. It really is good training about dealing with people that are in crisis. And I was like, let's face it, anytime somebody's pulled over by a police officer or has to deal with a police officer in a negative tone, it's a little bit of a crisis for them. Because you can ask every cop who's employed when they got pulled over for speeding, were they a little nervous? And they're all like, yeah, I was a little nervous when he pulled me over. So us having the empathy and sympathy to go with that, but then when things aren't, you can't negotiate your way out of, you can't talk your way out of, and you have to lay hands on people, having the skills and the ability to deal with them in professional and class. We do a lot of education and training in firearms, which we should. You know, it's use of deadly force. But at the end of the day, how often do we really use it in comparison? For Marietta, it's about every 4 to 6 years that we'll be involved in an officer-involved shooting, about every 4 to 6 years. But we put hands on somebody every single day. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But we don't give the officers the skills and the education and training, like I said, to handle that. So that's where this comes in, and I'm so thankful to be here today with you guys and to help push this forward.
So I've throughout the years with my kids are 18 and 20 years old, and throughout the years I've kind of kept a 3 commandments rule in my house, and it's always been be nice, help people, and leave things better than you found them. And you guys, and so that message, the last one was ingrained in me as we went along through my parents, but also when we became tactical officers, there's a couple of guys from the old TTPOA, Sandy Wall and Shannon Couch. I remember I was already in my 20s and in my 30s, and they started pushing that message harder. That's the way we do things. You guys are definitely keeping that alive, that leave it better than you found it thing, creating the programs, pushing the data out, and making it something that we can actually improve on as we go. Not just us improving it, but the people behind us can improve it. So I want to thank you all for what you all are doing for the first responders out there. That's a big deal. Casey?
Yeah, hey, thanks, guys. Visit us at alert.org. That's ALERRT.org for questions, comments, concerns. You can email us at thecall@alert.org. And if you have an opinion on if it's data or data, let us know. And with that, we're out. Fade to black.